Hi, welcome back to class. And this week we are on Module 14, and we are going to look at the earlier parts of ethnic studies in academia. And so, whoops, I'm hitting the wrong button here. And so I told you when we first started this class that we're going to get into a story about University of California, San Francisco State is where this all started. And so it's looking at, listen to a podcast called On Strike, Blow It Up. And so this podcast gets into the idea that up until about 50 years ago, there was no discussion on race and ethnic relations in a university setting on a large scale. So there were, some classes in, anthropology, but there weren't departments of things like American Indian Studies or African American Studies or Italian American Studies, Chinese American Studies, Latino Studies. These are all programs that we have in different schools around the country that, like I said, up until 50 years ago or so, we didn't have. In fact, I was an undergrad student at BH when they introduced American Indian Studies as a major, and we were part of getting that to cross over. And so it took some lobbying and petitions and quite a bit of work to actually have an American Indian Studies degree, even in South Dakota. And this was only in 1997 when they first introduced that degree. So this is a fairly new area, and so we're going to go into looking at where this came from. And I think in looking at classes like this, it's kind of nice to get an appreciation of what people did to trailblaze for students like you who are now taking these classes. So this week, we're going to move on through your responses to the Module 13 discussion. And then you're going to listen to the On Strike Blow It Up podcast. And there is a short Dropbox assignment associated with this. And then you're going to post an initial discussion box for each of the Module 14 discussions, which we will do the answers for during finals week next week. And these discussion questions are going to be based on this On Strike Blow It Up podcast and the podcast from last week, the video from last week on Patricia Hill Collins that you did the Dropbox on. We also will have a Dropbox assignment on Antifa, and so this is a group that is an anti-fascist. It's basically Antifa is short for anti-fascism. It's a term that is misused, and people don't really understand what they're talking about when they discuss Antifa. So you're going to see a scholar named Dr. Bray talk about Antifa. And so you'll have 2 weeks to do that assignment, a little less than 2 weeks. It'll be due next Friday. So you'll have this week and then through next Friday and the 8th to turn that in. And then there is a Chapter 13 quiz. This is the last quiz for the class. And you'll have again until then to turn it in. I will go through what we have here. And of course, here's the On Strike Blow It Up assignment. So there's a little podcast that to get to, you're going to click here. And this is from the NPR Code Switch podcast. You just click on Start Listening, and there you go. And that will play for you. That's about 40 minutes, but it's very interesting. Like I said, it gets into the idea that we didn't have this field of study until fairly recently. And here is an article attached that used to have the podcast on it. It's no longer here, but it has some information on the people in the podcast, and you can see some photographs of the people involved and get some more information. And this is just fascinating stuff. I think you'll find it very interesting. Let's see here. So basically it gets the idea that, classes like race and ethnic studies didn't just come out of nowhere. There were people who actually worked hard to get a class like this in the university setting. And here we have our Module 14 discussion area here. So you'll have a Patricia Hill Collins discussion. So just talk about your main takeaway from Black Feminism, Intersectionality, and Democratic Possibilities video. And I hope you found that really interesting. I see it's a real treat to listen to her speak. And then next, your main takeaway from the On Strike Blow It Up podcast, which again, I think most of you will find very interesting. I try to find things that videos and documentaries that get into the idea that where our class came from. So the idea of studying something, a lot of these classes are pretty recent additions to academics. Even social policy, that's a class that I also teach, and that wasn't widely taught until the 1960s. So we'll move on. We're going to look at the Antifa academic. So there's a short reading on Mr. Bray, who did quite a bit of writing on Antifa. And then there's a couple of videos. So one is Behind the Mask. It's looking at what Antifa is and what they do. And then here's a lecture from Mark Bray. And so he's speaking at a school and getting into the history of anti-fascism. So in this class we look at racism, we look at different ways of dealing with racism, and there's various models that get suggested, coalition building and education and different models of having people get together and cohabitate areas and develop relationships. But there's also there's also a field of study in academia and looking at the groups that get a little more confrontational with dealing with discrimination and racism. And so we will look at them briefly. There will be no discussion on Antifa, but I do want you to have a basic familiarity. So when you watch the news and they discuss a confrontation between them and alt-right group, you'll understand who they're talking about a little bit better. But other than that, we're moving along, so we're almost done with the semester. If you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to get back to me. And if you missed any quizzes, send me an email, and we'll see what we can do about reopening some up for you to try to get everybody caught up here. But send me an email about that as well, and we will see what we can do. Other than that, have a great week, and again, get back to me if any questions. Bye.